Have you ever heard the old warning that echoes across the forgotten roads of Raven County? If you're driving through Black Hollow Pass, don't stop at the toll booth after dark. No matter what you see or hear, most people brush it off as a ghost story, a legend, a tale to scare off kids from joyrides and keep truckers awake. But those who did stop, well, no one's seen them since. The booth still stands, barely clinging to the edge of Highway 13, broken and blackened like a rotting tooth in the jaw of the forest. Locals say she's still there, waiting, watching, listening for engines in the night. But who is she? And why must you never stop? This is not just a story. It's a warning. So turn your lights down low, turn the volume up high, and listen close. Because once this tale begins, you won't want to stop. Would you keep driving or stop to help if you saw a woman standing alone by an abandoned toll booth at night? Let us know in the comments. And if you love spine-chilling horror, eerie mysteries, and stories that stay with you long after they end, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Now, let the horror begin. It came in slanting sheets, driven sideways by wind that howled like a chorus of dying wolves. Max Donnelly gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting past the streaks running down his windshield, as his truck roared through the soaked, winding road of Black Hollow Pass. The wipers thudded back and forth like a heartbeat, barely keeping up. He wasn't supposed to be here. The GPS had glitched miles back, rerouting him through this backwoods stretch of road that wasn't on any map he recognized. His rig's headlights pierced the mist, cutting through thick fog that slithered between the trees like living things. The forest hugged the road close, gnarled trunks bent toward the pavement, as if listening. His CB radio crackled again, static. Just like the last 15 minutes, nothing but white noise and a faint whispering that almost sounded like words. He shook his head, blaming the storm and the elevation. Or maybe he was just tired. It had been 20 hours on the road, no stops, not even to piss. And then he saw, just beyond the bend, illuminated in his headlights like a corpse dragged into daylight, stood the toll booth. It was decrepit, wooden, leaning like it had been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling, the glass windows shattered, one side covered in what looked like thick claw marks. A faded red and white striped polearm lay across the road like a broken limb, snapped halfway down and stained with something that didn't look like rust. Max's stomach turned. There wasn't supposed to be a toll booth out here. This wasn't a toll road. He slowed slightly, not stopping, just cautious. His eyes narrowed, and then he saw her. She stood beside the booth, drenched in the rain, a white dress clinging to her thin frame. Her head was tilted as if listening. Long black hair hung across her face like curtains of shadow. One pale hand stretched out, palm up. Hitchhiker. Victim. Lure. Max's foot hovered over the brake. He didn't mean to slow, but something about her presence seemed off. The temperature inside his cab dropped 10 degrees in seconds. He exhaled, and his breath fogged up the inside of the glass. The truck's engine groaned under the sudden drag, like it didn't want to move forward either. The woman stepped forward, one foot, then another, still reaching. Max's instincts screamed no. His gut clenched. He tapped the accelerator, the truck surging forward with a roar. Her head snapped up, and Max caught a glimpse of her face. No eyes, just hollow sockets, dark and bleeding, as if something had carved them out and left her wandering, searching. Her mouth was open in a scream, but no sound came out. Her jaw stretched impossibly wide, tearing at the edges. In the blink of an eye, she was suddenly 5 feet closer, her hand pressed against the windshield, her skin cold even through the glass. Max screamed, wrenching the wheel hard. The semi veered off the road, crashing through the muddy shoulder and narrowly missing a tree. He hit the gas, fishtailing back onto the road, as the woman vanished into the mist behind him. His heart pounded like a war drum. The CB radio hissed louder now, but in between the static he heard a voice. She waits. Don't stop. Too late. Max didn't stop for another 20 miles. When he finally pulled over at a dimly lit gas station, he was shaking. His hands refused to unclench, and his breath came in short bursts. The clerk, a wiry man with sunken eyes, took one look at him and asked, "You come through the Max nodded, barely able to speak. Toll booth. There was someone. The man paled. You didn't stop, did you? No. God, no. Good. Then maybe you've still got a chance. Max blinked. What the hell is going on out there? The clerk leaned over the counter, voice low. You're not the first. That booth hasn't been manned since night. Some say the girl was a runaway. Others think she was sacrificed by a cult in those woods. Doesn't matter now. What matters is this. She wants you to stop. Because if you do, you never leave. Not really. Not all of you. Max felt bile rise in his throat. You'll be fine, the clerk continued, not sounding convinced. If you keep moving, but don't look back, and for God's sake, don't go back there. Max stumbled out into the rain again, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every noise. As he refueled his rig, he caught a glimpse of something in his side mirror. A pale figure, standing beneath the yellow glow of the gas station light, hair soaked, white dress plastered to her body. Watching, Max turned. No one there. The rain still fell like nails from the sky when Max slammed his truck door and pulled away from the gas station. Wheels spitting gravel. Ed didn't look back. He refused. He kept his eyes fixed on the blurred road ahead. White knuckles clenched around the wheel. His breath fogged the cab, and he swore he could still feel her handprint on the glass. She hadn't touched it, but he felt it. 27 miles later, he crossed into the outskirts of Trenton Hills, a rundown town with shuttered windows and rusted street signs. His fuel gauge was full, but his mind wasn't. He needed to talk to someone who'd believe him, someone who had heard of the booth, and the thing that waited there. He parked outside the only lit place open at 1:46 a.m. Briggs, a bar and billiard. It smelled like old smoke and spilled beer, but it was warm. Inside were 4 men nursing drinks, and a waitress who looked like she'd been there for 30 years. The jukebox played a country song too sad for words. Max walked in like a man who'd seen the grave. "You look like hell," the bartender said, a burly man with a beard like steel wool. "I just came through Black Hollow Pass," Max croaked, voice hoarse. "There's something out there, at the toll booth." The entire bar froze. Even the jukebox stopped. No one moved. No one spoke, until a voice broke the silence from the corner booth. "She followed you, didn't she?" Max turned. An old man sat in the shadows, fingers shaking as he lit a cigarette with a match that fizzled against his palm. "You saw her," he said. "The girl with the bleeding eye." Max nodded slowly. "She touched the truck. I didn't stop, but she was there." The old man exhaled a stream of smoke. "Then you got the stain." "The what?" He pointed at Max's chest. "It's on you now. You don't see it, but she does. That's all she needs. You passed her by, and that's her invitation. She's patient. She doesn't come right away. She waits." "Waits for what?" The old man's eyes gleamed. "For you to forget, let your guard down, fall asleep. That's when she climbs in." The bartender interrupted. "Enough, Harold." "No," Max said, voice rising. "No, let him talk. I need to know what she is, why she's there." Harold leaned forward, his face half lit in the flickering neon. "They say she was a girl named Clara. She ran from something. Some say her father. Others say a man who claimed her soul and blood. Either way, she died there. Not quickly. The toll booth keeper was the last to see her alive. He vanished too. But something stayed behind. Something angry, hungry. She's not Clara anymore." "Not really," Max swallowed. "What do I do?" Harold stubbed out his cigarette. "You keep moving. You stay in light. You don't sleep until sunrise. And if you hear her voice, don't answer." Max nodded, adrenaline pulsing anew. "Thanks. You see her again," Harold added. As Max turned, "Run, and don't look in her eyes, even if she doesn't have any." Outside, the wind had stilled. No more rain, just eerie silence. Too quiet. Max climbed into his rig, fingers trembling. The world around him felt different, like the shadows were thicker. The truck rumbled to life, headlights piercing the empty lot. But something was wrong. The windshield was fogged from the inside. He reached for the defroster, but his hand froze. Letters were forming in the condensation. HELPM. He wiped the glass, and behind it in the passenger seat was a figure. White dress, black hair. Max stretched wide, teeth like broken glass. Max screamed and grabbed his tire iron from under the seat, swinging violently at the image. But the cab was empty again. The glass shattered under the strike, fragments spraying across his dashboard. He tumbled out of the truck, falling onto wet asphalt, chest heaving. Alone. But the message was still there, etched into the broken glass, in perfect lines. You should have stopped. He didn't dare. He drove until dawn, eyes bloodshot, heart hammering every time headlights passed him in the other lane. He reached out to a friend in Sable Creek, an old mechanic named Diego, who let him park his truck behind the shop and crash on a cot inside the garage. You look like death, Diego said, handing him coffee. What happened to your windshield? Max just stared at him. She's following me. That night he chained the doors, blocked the windows and sat with a crowbar in his lap. At 2:17 a.m., a scratching came from the back wall, slow, rhythmic, like nails dragging across the steel. Diego was asleep in the next room. Max held his breath. Then a voice. Max, soft, fragile, like a girl whispering through tears. I'm cold. Let me in, please. He shut his eyes tight. Please, I don't want to be alone anymore. You were the only one who didn't stop. His hands were slick with sweat. The scratching grew louder. Now scraping. Gouging. Help me, Max. You're already mine. The lights flickered. The air dropped 10 degrees. The garage door creaked inward, groaning under pressure. The chains rattled, then stilled. Max gripped the crowbar, ready to die or fight. But the silence returned. The cold faded, until the mirror above Diego's workbench cracked on its own, and scrawled across it was a final message. See you tonight. Diego found Max the next morning, crouched in the corner of the garage, crowbar still clenched in his shaking hands, surrounded by a circle of salt he'd poured with trembling fingers. The mirror above the workbench had shattered completely overnight. The temperature in the room was frigid, breath visible in the air, though the heater was on full blast. What the hell happened here? Diego whispered, stepping around the broken glass. Max didn't answer right away. His eyes were sunken, bloodshot. He hadn't slept, He stared straight ahead like he was watching something no one else could see. She spoke to me again, Max muttered, voice dry as sand. She's getting closer, every night. Doesn't matter where I go, she finds me. Diego swallowed, his usual bravado gone. Man, you need help. This is bad. You think I'm crazy? I think you're in danger, Diego said. But not from ghosts, from yourself. Sleep deprivation, PTSD. You gotta get off the road for a while. Max shot him a glare. She's not in my head. The words hung there between them like poison. Diego sighed, sat down across from him. Look, there's someone, a guy who deals with weird stuff. Real low profile, kind of a local legend. Name's Sheriff Ray Calder. Used to be county sheriff until he retired early. After, well, let's just say he had his own run-in with something out on that same road. Max sat up. He's seen her? Diego nodded. Won't talk about it much, but it's the reason he quit. Lives out by Stonemore Ridge. I'll drive you. No, Max said quickly. I can't stop moving. Then I'll follow in my car. Just don't be alone tonight, all right? The drive to Stonemore Ridge was quiet. Too quiet. The forested road leading to Calder's cabin was lined with massive oaks, gnarled and twisted as if in pain. The sky had gone pale with cloud cover, casting everything in an ashen light. When they reached the clearing, Calder's cabin stood stoic and silent. Old logs, tin roof, a rusted truck in the drive. A wind chime made of bones hung from the porch, rattling gently. Diego knocked once, then twice. A man answered. Ray Calder looked like he hadn't aged. He had decayed. Wrinkles cut deep into his face, his eyes sunken but alert. A thick scar ran down his neck like a claw mark, partially hidden by the collar of his denim shirt. Help you? He asked, eyeing Max with suspicion. I saw her, Max said. At the toll booth. Ray froze. You didn't stop? No, but she's still coming. Ray stepped back, letting them in without another word. The inside of the cabin was lined with salt, candles and hand-carved charms made of ash and bone. Dozens of newspaper clippings were pinned to the walls. Disappearances, wrecks, missing truckers, all within a 10-mile radius of the old toll booth. She's part of the road now, Ray said, once they were seated. It started as a haunting, then something dark. She doesn't just scare people. She takes them, replaces them. Max leaned forward. Replaces. Ray lit a cigarette with a silver lighter. They found one driver, who survived. Barely. He got out of his truck 3 days later, but his eyes were gone. Hollow. He kept whispering her name, said she crawled inside him while he was asleep. He didn't last long. Max's hands shook again. How do I stop it? You don't, Ray said coldly. You can't banish her. She doesn't obey ritual. No Latin words, no symbols, no cross. She's not a spirit. She's infestation. Some say she's a fracture in reality, like something broke open when she died and never sealed. There has to be something. Ray hesitated. There's one thing, but it's dangerous. Desperate. Max nodded. Tell me. Ray stood and walked to a locked chest. From it, he pulled a worn leather journal and placed it on the table. The cover bore no title, only a symbol etched in dried blood. An open mouth, stretched unnaturally wide. This belonged to a highway priest, Ray explained. He studied the cursed roads of America. He believed in confronting the haunting directly, facing the ghost in the place it was born. If you want to be free of her, Max, you'll have to go back. Max paled. You want me to return to the toll booth? She attached herself to you there. That's the anchor. If you confront her where it started, maybe you can sever the bond. Diego stood. This is suicide, man. Max turned to Ray. And if I don't, she'll take you. Or worse, wear you. Max took the journal. That night, Max drove alone. Diego followed, reluctantly. They took the back route into Black Hollow Pass. As twilight faded into the jaws of night, fog clung to the road like ghost breath. The trees looked taller, more alive. The wind carried whispers. At 12:09 a.m., they arrived. The toll booth stood untouched, rotten, crooked, waiting. Max left the truck running and stepped out, journal in hand. The pages trembled in the wind as he approached the booth. Inside, it was dark. Cobwebs clung to the corners. Broken glass crunched beneath his boots. A heavy silence draped over everything, like the woods were holding their breath. He opened the journal. To confront the weeping Ma, one must see as she sees. His hands trembled. From the back pocket of the journal, a small envelope fell. Inside, 2 black glass marbles. Eyes, fake ones. Smooth, cold. He read on. Place them over your eyes. Stand where she died. If she accepts your invitation, she will come. If she doesn't, the rest was scratched out in deep, desperate gouges. Max stared at the marbles, then at the spot beside the booth where she first appeared. He stepped into the mud, breath hitching. The forest fell silent. He lifted the marbles to his eyes and placed them in his sockets. Darkness, immediate, blinding. Then her voice. Max. He turned toward it, vision black. Let me in. The air around him grew thick. He couldn't breathe. Then a scream, so loud it shattered glass miles away. Max fell to his knees. Blood poured from his ears. She was here, and she was no longer begging. The scream didn't stop. It expanded. It grew into a sonic flood, a wall of pure sound, crashing through Max's skull like hammers made of static. Blood trickled from his nose. The ground quaked beneath him, and the cold in the air thickened until his breath turned to frost mid-exhale. He ripped the black glass marbles from his eyes and collapsed backward, vision reeling, the world spinning in disorienting spirals. For 1 second, just one, he saw her. Not through mist, not as a shape, not as a voice in the dark, but clearly, she stood inches away, pale skin stretched tight over bone, her dress soaked red at the hem, hollow sockets where eyes should be, black ether leaking from her mouth, staining her chin, fingers cracked like tree branches, bones exposed at the joints. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Max scrambled backward, heart thrashing inside his ribs like a trapped animal. He was too scared to scream. All he could do was crawl. The thing that used to be Clara tilted her head at him. The movement too fast, too sharp. Why didn't you stop? She asked, in a voice that sounded like teeth grinding against metal. Behind Max, the rumble of Diego's car engine roared. Headlights cut through the fog, but not her. The beams passed through her like she wasn't made of light or flesh, or anything that obeyed laws. She just was. Max screamed, finally, and Diego jumped out of his car, flashlight in hand. Max, she turned. The beam from Diego's flashlight landed directly on her. Her body twitched violently. She hated the light. With a howl that made the trees bend away from her, she lunged, not at Max, but straight toward Diego. No, Max shouted, scrambling to his feet, but it was too late. Diego froze as she collided with him and passed through him. His body convulsed. He dropped the flashlight, collapsed onto his back, mouth wide open in a silent gasp. The light skittered across the asphalt, casting long shadows through the toll booth's remains. Max reached him in seconds. Diego, Diego, say something. His friend blinked, once, twice. Then his head slowly turned toward Max. But it wasn't his eyes staring back. They were black, endless. Too late, he whispered. Then he screamed, not like a man in pain, but like something trying to escape through his throat. His jaw dislocated with a sickening crack. His hands clawed at his own chest. His skin went pale in seconds, veins rising like black roots under the surface. Max stumbled back in horror as Diego's body arched unnaturally, bones cracking one by one. And then, he collapsed. Still, the forest fell silent. Max waited, prayed, but Diego didn't move again. Only his shadow did. It twitched once, shifted, then lay still. Max turned and ran. He didn't know where, just away, through the trees, through the fog. His lungs burned, his heart screamed, but he couldn't stop. Behind him, branches cracked, twigs snapped, footsteps. Not fast, not desperate, measured. She was following. Max didn't remember reaching the old ranger station until he burst through its half-rotted doors, slamming them shut behind him. The structure leaned dangerously against time, half buried in vines and decay. But it was something, somewhere. He braced the door with a filing cabinet, gasping for breath, then fumbled through his pockets for the highway priest's journal. He flipped wildly through its pages, now streaked with blood. His blood, Diego's, it didn't matter. He found a page half-burned at the corners, but still legible. If the entity takes form, you must trap it in ritual ground, circle of consecrated ash, touched by fire and shadow. Stekis, no words, make no plea. Let her come, let her hunger, let her fail. Consecrated ash. Max scanned the room. In the back corner, he spotted a fireplace filled with years of soot. That would have to do. He grabbed a rusted pot, scraped every inch of the chimney's guts into it, then poured it onto the warped floor in a jagged ring. He stood in the middle. The air shifted. Outside, something scratched against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then her voice. Let me in, Max. He stayed silent. Please, you brought me back here. This is where I died. Don't you care? Still he said nothing. She growled. The door exploded inward. Shards of rotted wood flying like shrapnel. Max shielded his face as the figure floated in, no longer pretending to be human. She hovered above the ground, hair floating, mouth wide open, showing nothing but a swirling void of jagged bone. Her chest rose and fell in impossible spasms, ribs cracking and knitting themselves with every breath. She looked at the circle of ash and smiled. I've done this before, she whispered. You think this stops me? She lunged. The moment she crossed the line of ash, the air hissed and sparked like live wires snapping in water. She screamed, a furious, burning sound, as flames erupted around the ring, forming a cage of fire and shadow. Her form flickered, warped, glitched, like a broken tape. Max didn't move. Let me out, she shrieked, face splitting sideways in rage. He said nothing. The ring burned brighter, and then, it began to pull her inward. Not her body, but her shadow, her essence. She thrashed, clawing at nothing, screaming names Max didn't recognize. Clara, Daddy, Tollkeeper, Mother. So many voices, all hers, all wrong. The fire swirled tighter, and she vanished. The room went dark. Max collapsed, sobbing, alone in the ash, and silence. Outside the sun was rising, but Max couldn't move, not from exhaustion, not from trauma, but because, In the corner of the room, something stirred. Not her, not exactly. Diego. He stood, slowly, his head twitching, eyes black as pitch. He looked at Max. Max's heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat as Diego's corpse moved again. It wasn't right. It couldn't be. The body was too stiff. The movements too jerky. The man standing before him wasn't Diego anymore. Not entirely. Max backed away, every muscle in his body screaming to run, but his legs betrayed him, locking in place. Diego, no, whatever had taken him, stared at him with those black, soulless eyes, lips curling into a smile that was wrong on every level. It wasn't the friendly grin Max had known for years. It was something predatory, something unnatural. Diego? Max whispered, his voice shaking with uncertainty. But Diego, no, this thing didn't respond. It just kept moving closer, one step at a time. Max reached for the crowbar that had been lying beside him, the familiar weight comforting in his palm, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough. It never had been. Not when she was involved. The creature, the shell of Diego, let out a low, guttural laugh. It wasn't human, not even close. It was like the sound of a man choking on his own words. You can't outrun her, Max, the thing said, voice barely recognizable. Diego's voice was laced with something deep, dark, and malevolent. You've already crossed the line. The toll booth was just the beginning. Max could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Diego, please, come back. I never wanted this. You're already mine, the creature replied, its grin growing wider. You've always been. She just opened the door. Now there's no going back. Max's mind raced. He had to get out. He had to do something. But his body wouldn't cooperate. His gaze flickered to the still burning ring of ash, the remnants of the ritual that had kept her contained for so long. She hadn't been stopped. Not entirely. No. Max stumbled back toward the fireplace, his hands shaking violently as he grabbed the journal once more, flicking through the pages with feverish urgency. His fingers skimmed over the words that seemed to blur together in his panic, until his eyes landed on something that sent a chill through him. To banish the entity completely, one must invoke the sacred chant of unbinding. Max read the words over and over, but they made no sense. What chant? What words? Was this what the priest had used? Was this what had made her retreat? Don't you see, Matt? The thing hissed, stepping closer. She's already inside you. Inside your mind. You can't fight her anymore. Max's fingers tremblingly closed the journal, his mind spinning. He had to try. He had no choice. If he failed, if he didn't do something, he would join the others. He would become just another piece of her endless, ever-growing collection. Just another soul for her to twist, to wear, to feed on. A sharp noise broke through the haze of his thoughts, the scrape of something metallic, dragging on stone. Then the most terrifying sound of all, the whispering. Max. It was her. Not through his ears but through his mind. Inside him. Max. Her voice was soft, comforting. She was there. Close. Too close. Max could feel the weight of her presence settling in, pushing into his chest like a suffocating pressure. He gripped the journal tighter, determined not to let her win. Not this time. He had to speak. He had to do something. Max chanted the first words he could make out. Nonsense at first. Gibberish, but as he spoke they began to take shape. The air in the room shifted again. Colder now, sharper. The light flickering as though it too were terrified. His voice grew louder, more urgent. I cast you out, he shouted, the words not feeling like his own, but something ancient, something old. I bind you to your tomb. Her voice came again, louder now, closer. Max, don't you see? You can't escape me. You're already mine. But he kept chanting over and over, the words tumbling from his mouth in a mad rhythm. As the air around him grew hotter, the flames from the ash ring grew higher, licking at the walls, the ceiling. But she didn't retreat. She only pressed in closer. Diego's body lurched forward again. And this time, it was quicker. The thing was no longer just mimicking him. It was becoming him. It was taking Diego. His skin stretched, shifting, and the bones in his face popped and realigned like a puppet being controlled by an invisible hand. Max's heart raced faster as he heard the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was returning. Suddenly, the air became unbearable, heavy with a scent of rot, of old earth, of death itself. The temperature dropped dramatically, and the flames in the ash circles sputtered, their light flickering like candles caught in a draft. Max's mind was starting to break. The chant was failing. The thing, Diego lunged toward him again, faster this time, its mouth opening wide like a gaping chasm. The blackness inside swallowed everything. And then, Max saw her, not the broken shell of her body, not the thing that wore her like a mask, but her, the real her. Clara. She stood just behind Diego, her eyes now burning with a black fire, her mouth stretched wide, revealing the same void Max had seen before. She opened her mouth, speaking the words that shattered everything around them. This is your choice now. You can run, Max. You can hide, but I will always follow. I will always come for you. Max felt his chest tighten, the weight of her voice crushing him, suffocating him. He had to fight back. He had to. The walls of the cabin cracked, and then the air ignited. The heat from the fire was unbearable. The cabin walls groaned as if they too were fighting against the oppressive force that had taken root here. Max's breath came in shallow, desperate gasps, his hands shaking as he gripped the journal tighter. The words blurred together, but he forced his eyes to stay focused on the page. He couldn't lose. Not now. Not after everything he had already sacrificed. Clara, or whatever had become of her, was still there, still looming behind the twisted mockery of Diego. Her form shimmered in and out of focus like a ghost, caught between worlds, her blackened eyes locking onto him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. I will always find you, Max. Her voice, no longer soft but sharp, echoed in his mind, a jagged whisper that clawed at his sanity. I will always take you back to the road, to the toll booth, to me. Max couldn't breathe. Her presence was suffocating, filling every inch of the room with an unholy weight. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of rot, of something long dead. The room seemed to close in on him, its walls bending, distorting like the space itself was being twisted by her will. You've come this far, she continued, her voice now a shrill, piercing screech. But you don't understand. The road isn't done with you, and neither am I. Max's legs buckled beneath him, but he forced himself to stay upright, eyes fixed on the journal. He couldn't falter. He couldn't let her take him. Not again. The flames in the ash circle flared violently, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like twisted, deformed figures. The heat surged higher, the temperature in the cabin rising to an unbearable intensity. Sweat dripped down Max's forehead, his skin slick and burning. But he couldn't stop. The chant had to work. It had to. You think these words will save you? Clara's laughter rang in his ears, a maddening shrill cackle that shook his bones. You're nothing but a piece in a game you'll never win. Max didn't look up. His voice grew stronger, more forceful with each passing second, as the journal seemed to guide him, its pages flipping on their own, the ink glowing faintly in the dim light. The air seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, the room alive with a presence that was more than human. And then, just as he thought the chant might collapse in on itself, the impossible happened. Clara stopped. Her body froze, suspended in the air as if held by invisible threads. The smile twisted on her face, her mouth hanging open like a gaping wound. Her eyes, those endless black voids, flickered, the darkness within them swirling like smoke. Max dared not look away. He had to finish this. You will never escape me, Max. The words were not just spoken. They were a command and order woven into the very fabric of his being, reaching into the deepest parts of his soul. But he gritted his teeth and fought back. He wasn't going to be her puppet. The flames from the ash circle began to move of their own accord, twisting and writhing like serpents, crawling toward Clara. The shadows in the room grew longer, more aggressive, as if eager to consume her. The walls groaned again, the cabin itself seeming to struggle against the overwhelming power, filling the space. Max could feel it, the pull, the hunger. It was like a riptide tugging at his mind, a force stronger than anything he'd ever felt. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to push through it, to fight back against her will. And then, with one last desperate cry, he finished the chant. The final words came out in a rush, a guttural roar that seemed to shatter the very air around him. I cast you back into the dark where you belong. Everything went silent. The flames stopped moving. The air grew still, as if the world was holding its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was deafening. Max's heart pounded in his chest as he opened his eyes, fear clawing at his throat. Had it worked? Was she gone? Then the ground beneath him shook. The lights in the cabin flickered wildly. The walls creaked and groaned as if they were being torn apart by some invisible force. The shadows on the walls began to twitch, stretching out like hungry tendrils reaching for Clara. Max turned and saw her. She wasn't standing anymore. She was rising. Clara's body twisted and contorted in impossible ways, her skin warping like wax in a fire. Her jaw unhinged, dropping wide enough to swallow the room. The air around her seemed to warp and twist, reality itself beginning to unravel at the edges. "No," Max whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of her twisting form. "No, no, no." The thing that had once been Clara reached out toward him, its hands like claws, elongating as if drawn by the gravity of his fear. "I told you, Max." Her voice was no longer human. It was a hiss, a crackling sound like burning paper. "You can't escape me. You'll never be free." Max backed away, desperate, his heart pounding in his chest like a wild animal. He had to act. He had to do something before she consumed him completely. Then the impossible happened. With a loud, horrifying crack, the figure of Clara collapsed. The room seemed to implode around them, the walls buckling inwards, the floor cracking open as a dark void stretched from the center of the cabin. Max fell to his knees as the world around him split apart, the floor giving way beneath him. The last thing he heard was her voice, distorted and frantic, echoing through the darkness. "I'll always be waiting, at the toll booth." Then there was nothing. Max awoke to silence. It was absolute unnerving. His eyes fluttered open, the edges of his vision blurred, the world spinning around him like he was drifting in a dream. He tried to move, but his body felt like it was sinking into the ground. His limbs were heavy, unresponsive, as if he had been buried alive in the earth itself. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. His mind was blank, a thick fog of confusion clouding his thoughts. All he could hear was the deafening stillness. Then he remembered. The toll booth, the ritual. Clara, Diego. His heart skipped a beat. His breath hitched in his throat as the full weight of everything that had happened slammed into him. The sacrifice, the endless cycle, the toll booth, always waiting. And her. She had never really left, had she? Slowly, Max managed to sit up. The room around him was dark, almost suffocating in its stillness. The walls were crumbling, the ceiling sagging in places like the remnants of a building long abandoned. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the very same stench that had filled the cabin when Clara had come for him. It clung to him now, heavy in his nostrils, like it was seeping into his skin. He wiped his face, his fingers trembling as they brushed away the sweat and dirt. His heart was pounding in his chest. It felt like he was suffocating. He had to get out. He had to. A sound. It was faint at first, just a distant whisper, a sound too quiet to be real. But then it grew louder. It became clearer, a scraping noise. Something dragging across the ground. Max's eyes snapped to the door of the cabin, his breath catching in his throat as the shadowy figure of a person appeared in the threshold. His heart froze, blood turning to ice. He knew that shape. It wasn't Clara, not directly, but it was her. She had found him again. Max stood, legs weak and unsteady beneath him. He didn't want to look. He didn't want to see it, but his gaze was drawn to her, as if by some invisible force. The toll booth, the waiting. There, in the doorframe, just beyond the threshold of light, was a figure dressed in the remnants of the toll-keeper's uniform. The faded, blood-stained dress fluttered in the wind, and the long, tangled hair of the toll-keeper hung down like an eerie veil. Her hollow eyes were locked onto Max, blackness swirling within them, as if they were not eyes at all, but hollow voids. A whispering breath escaped her lips. "Max," the toll-keeper crooned. her voice as dry and brittle as dead leaves, her head tilted unnaturally to one side, cracking with a sickening sound, like bones snapping under pressure. Max stepped backward, his feet stumbling over the jagged floor, but there was nowhere to run. The space around him seemed to close in, the walls leaning inward like they were pushing him toward the figure, toward her. The toll keeper stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she reached a skeletal hand toward him. The space between them seemed to stretch impossibly long, and yet she was there closer than ever, her breath rattling in her chest. Every step she took made the air heavier. Every movement of hers seemed to drag the room itself into darkness. Max couldn't move. His body was paralyzed with fear, his mind screaming for him to do something, anything. But he was stuck, trapped. "No," Max whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, no more." The toll keeper smiled, a grin too wide to be human. "You are mine, you always have been." Her voice slithered into his mind, wrapping itself around his thoughts like cold fingers. "You can't escape the road. You can't escape me." Max's blood ran cold as the shadows began to thicken around her, curling like tendrils grasping at the edges of his vision. The toll booth waited, even though it had already claimed him. It was an endless cycle, always the same. He would never be free. A cold wind swept through the room, and for a moment Max thought he saw the faint outline of the old toll booth again, standing tall in the distance. Fog wrapped around its structure like a shroud, the pale moonlight flickering off its broken windows. The same place, the same curse. "You're just like the others now, Max. You've crossed the line." The toll keeper's voice cracked, her lips curling into a smile that didn't belong to a human being. "You can't escape." Max turned. He could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on him, but a flicker of defiance sparked in him. He wouldn't let her take him completely. Not like this. He had to fight. He had to. The door behind him cracked open. Max's head snapped toward it. There in the frame stood Diego, not the friend he had known, but the thing that had worn his skin. Max's breath hitched. "No, no, no, no." Diego, or whatever this was, stepped forward, his eyes black and empty, his face twisted in a grotesque parody of the man he had been. His body moved jerkily like a puppet controlled by invisible string. He raised one hand and Max could feel the weight of his gaze pressing into his mind, slowly suffocating him. "You're not done yet." Diego's voice was hollow, a distant echo of something long gone. The toll keeper's laughter filled the room, sharp and shrill. "They never are, Max. You're mine now. Forever." Max felt it. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't escape. And then, just as his vision blurred, his final thought flickered through his mind. The toll booth was waiting. "Let me know your thoughts, or if you want another adventure." They say the forest speaks when the fire goes low. But what if the lake listens? In the heart of Ashpine Woods, tucked far from cell towers and paved roads, there lies a lake so still, even the wind seems to fear it. It's the kind of place where stories are passed down, not in books or documentaries, but through whispers under the stars, crackling flames, licking the dark, and wide eyes staring into the unknown. But some tales aren't meant to be told. This one? It started just like any other campfire story, until someone vanished, dragged into the depths by something no one believed existed. Not until the screaming stopped. Not until the bubbles rose. Not until the lake pulled him under. Before we begin Generation 1 of this chilling tale, I've got a question for you. Have you ever heard a story so real, so terrifying, that it stayed with you long after the fire went out? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear the scariest story you were ever told. If you're into creepy legends, eerie forests, and the kind of horror that makes you sleep with the lights on, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. There's more where this came from, and trust me, you won't want to miss how deep this story goes. The flames danced in the center of the clearing, casting long twitching shadows on the twisted trunks of pine and birch. A group of 7 huddled close, their sleeping bags forming a crooked circle around the campfire, like a makeshift shrine. Crackling wood split the silence while the night pressed in thick and heavy, No moon, no stars. Just the hissing breath of the fire and the forest murmuring beyond it. Mason, the self-declared leader of the trip, leaned forward, a wicked grin playing across his lips. His eyes reflected the fire's glow, giving him the look of something half wild. "Ever heard of the drowner of Black Hollow Lake?" he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "the kind that's part joke, part dare." The others, Callie, Jaden, Brielle, Desmond, Ivy and Theo, exchanged glances. Some smirked, others rolled their eyes. "That a new cryptid you made up?" Jaden asked, munching noisily on a half-melted marshmallow. Mason shook his head slowly. "It's older than any of us, older than the town. They say it started with the mines back in the..." Workers would hear singing near the lake, low, watery hums, like a lullaby sung through a drainpipe. Then one by one, they vanished. Brielle shivered, pulling her hoodie tighter. "How does it go? The story?" Mason's eyes gleamed. "Nobody knows what it is. Some say it's a man who drowned and came back cursed. Others say it's the lake itself, alive, hungry, waiting. But they all agree on one thing: you don't tell the story out loud, near the water." The group fell silent. Beyond the fire's edge, the trees were tall and hunched, as if they were listening. "Why?" Ivy asked softly. Mason leaned in, letting the firelight flicker over his face. "Because the lake hears its name, and when it does, it wants another." A long silence followed, broken only by the hiss of a log collapsing into glowing embers. Desmond snorted. "That's some grade-A urban legend crap." But his laugh was tight, forced. Callie shot him a look. "Is this like that Bloody Mary thing? Say the name 3 times and it appears." Mason smiled without humor. "Only once. If you say it while fire's burning and water's near, it wakes up." They all went quiet again, unsure if it was just a story or something more, something heavier. Then, as if to challenge fate, Theo scoffed. "Fine, I'll say it. Drowner of Black Hollow Lake." Everyone stiffened. The wind picked up just then, rustling through the treetops, sending a soft hiss over their heads. The fire guttered for a moment, spitting sparks into the darkness. "Smooth," Brielle muttered, pulling her sleeping bag close. "Seriously, not cool." Callie snapped at Theo. "What if that's like an old tribal name or something? You don't just chant that stuff." But Theo laughed it off, tossing a beer can into the pile. "Relax. It's just a campfire story." Still, the tension had cracked the group's fun. Conversation dimmed. Laughter faded. Eventually they drifted off one by one, retreating to their tents and sleeping bags, leaving the fire to die with a soft crackle and sigh. Theo was the first to hear it. The creak of water moving, though there was no wind, no current, nothing that should make a sound like that. It came from beyond the trees, past the brush in the direction of the lake they'd hiked past earlier that afternoon. He sat up slowly, the air around him colder than it had any right to be. He rubbed his arms, chilled with sweat, and heard it again, closer now, wet, dragging, like something pulling itself across soaked leaves. One long pause, then another. He unzipped his bag, stood, and crept past the sleeping forms around the ashes of the fire. There in the woods, something waited. "Probably a raccoon," he muttered to himself, though the words came out thin and unsure. Still, he moved toward the sound. The curiosity in him, or the beer, nudged his boots through the underbrush. He followed the path to where moonlight shimmered faintly off a body of still water. Black Hollow Lake. A pale mist hovered just above the surface, low and clinging like breath on a mirror. The air stank faintly of algae, and something older, something metallic and rotten. He was about to turn back when he heard it. That same humming Mason had mentioned. Low, mournful. It didn't sound human, or maybe it did, but twisted like it was underwater and choking. Theo's heart pounded, and he took a step forward, mesmerized. A ripple formed at the lake's center, then another. He froze, and from the dark water, a shape emerged. It rose without a splash. Silent, deliberate, a head slick and glistening, followed by shoulders, then long arms reaching out. Its face was featureless, smooth, except for its mouth wide, lipless, yawning. Theo tried to scream. The creature didn't swim. It slid toward him like shadow across water. He turned to run, but roots, mud, something tangled around his ankle. The last thing he saw was the firelight from camp flickering through the trees. Then cold, silence, and the sound of bubbles breaking the surface. Maybe he wandered off to pee, Jaden said, though the edge in his voice betrayed his doubt. Hours passed. They searched, called his name, scanned the lake's edge. No sign. Then Mason spotted something, marks in the mud, drag marks, leading straight into the lake. No footprints came back out. The sun filtered weakly through the pine canopy, casting a wan glow across the campsite. But even in the morning light, an unnatural stillness had settled over everything. Birds weren't chirping. Insects, usually a persistent hum in the background, were eerily silent. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Callie stood at the edge of the lake, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on the water's glassy surface. A slight mist clung to the shoreline, curling around the rocks like fingers reluctant to let go. Her stomach twisted at the memory of Theo's sleeping bag. Untouched, perfectly arranged, like someone had deliberately left it behind, or like someone else had taken the time to make it look that way. He wouldn't just wander off, she said firmly, her voice tight with emotion. Jaden knelt near the drag marks again, tracing the indentations with a stick. The grooves cut deep into the mud, long and smooth as though something heavy had been pulled, not something walking away. He was probably drunk and fell in. Or maybe he pranked us, Jaden said, though even as the words left his mouth, he didn't believe them. The beer cans they'd brought were untouched near the fire pit. Theo never drank more than 2, and he was always the one to brag about his tolerance. Then why wouldn't he come back? Ivy asked, standing a few paces behind, arms hugging herself. Desmond glanced toward Mason, the self-proclaimed expert of the eerie. This your idea of a goke, man? You scare the crap out of everyone with that drowner crap. Then one of us goes missing. Mason, uncharacteristically pale, shook his head. I didn't do anything. It was just a story, I swear. Brielle spoke up from behind them. So what now? We're stuck out here with no signal and someone possibly dead. Don't say that, Callie snapped. Well, he didn't evaporate, Callie, Brielle shouted, her voice cracking. A tense silence fell. Then Mason finally broke it. We hike out, now. If Theo's messing around, we'll catch him on the trail. If not, we need to find someone with a radio or something. The others nodded. No one was smiling anymore. They packed quickly, some more methodically than others. Ivy refused to get within 10 feet of the lake. Desmond kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to emerge from the trail line. Mason led the way, jaw tight, his usual swagger gone. As they moved deeper into the woods, following the thin trail they'd hiked in on 2 days earlier, the atmosphere thickened. The forest was quieter than it had been yesterday, the wind absent, the air oppressive. Even the sunlight seemed diluted, the colors around them pale and sickly. By noon, Callie noticed something strange. Didn't we pass that mossy stump already? Jaden turned to look. That one? No way. That's just another stump. Are you sure? She asked. It looks familiar. 30 minutes later, Brielle stopped in her tracks, her face pale. Okay, that's the 3rd time I've seen that hollow tree with the slash on it. Mason frowned. I'm following the GPS path I saved. We're on the right trail, but we're going in circles, Ivy said. Her voice trembled. I know we are. Desmond pushed past a thicket, determined to break the loop. But when he emerged into a clearing, his breath caught in his throat. There in the center of the clearing was the very fire pit they'd sat around last night. The camp. They were back where they started. What the hell, Jaden muttered, eyes darting. No, this isn't possible, Mason said, pulling out his phone. The GPS app showed them dead center in their previous location. I was walking a straight line. The trees seemed to shift, their gnarled limbs arching ever so slightly inward. We're being messed with, Brielle whispered. Ivy backed away from the lake. This place is wrong. It's like the forest is alive. A gust of wind blew through then, sharp, sudden, and cold. It carried with it a faint sound. A voice. He hulp. They froze. It came again, unmistakable now. Theo's voice. Help me, please. Callie spun toward the lake. The voice came from there, just beyond the foggy edge of the water. Theo, she shouted. Where are you? The group rushed to the shore, scanning the surface. But there was nothing. No ripples, no signs of movement. Then the voice came again, louder. Callie. It was right next to her ear. She turned, but no one stood behind her. Suddenly Jaden screamed. They spun to see him stumbling back from the water, holding his arm. It was dripping wet, despite him not touching the lake. What happened? Mason yelled. It reached out. Jaden stammered, eyes wide with horror. A hand. I saw it come from the water. It grabbed me. Mason rushed forward, pulling up Jaden's sleeve. His forearm was smeared with slimy green muck, and 4 deep welts, like finger marks, curved around his skin. Everyone back from the lake, Mason ordered. They backed away, retreating into the tree line. No one said a word, not even Desmond, who was usually the first to crack a joke under stress. Their eyes kept darting to the lake's edge, half expecting it to follow. That night, no one slept. They took turns keeping watch, huddled around a freshly built fire. But the warmth didn't comfort them. Every so often, they'd hear something rustling leaves. With no wind, the soft snap of a twig, a breath that wasn't their own. And worst of all, the singing, soft and low, like something just beneath the surface, was humming a lullaby, trying to draw them closer. No one spoke of it. They just listened and waited for morning. But dawn didn't come. At least, not when it should have. The sky remained dim. The mist thickened. The lake, closer than it had been the night before, as if creeping forward, watching, waiting. The mist coiled low to the ground like a serpent, winding around trees and clinging to boots. As the group huddled together, backs to the slowly advancing lake, the sky remained that perpetual shade of pre-dawn blue, as though time had stalled. Birds never returned. Not a single leaf moved unless something touched it. They'd been trapped here now for what felt like a full day. This place doesn't follow the rules, Ivy whispered, staring at the faint trail that had once led out. It's like we're not on a map anymore. Mason stood near the fire, which he had rebuilt even though the wood was damp and reluctant to burn. His eyes were red-rimmed, shoulders hunched with exhaustion and something deeper guilt. Callie watched him from across the clearing. She had questions, but more than that, she had doubt. A gnawing feeling Mason knew more than he was letting on. Jaden's arm was getting worse. The bruised finger marks had turned a sickly greenish black. They throbbed, swollen, and cold to the touch. It hurts like hell, he muttered. It feels like something's still inside it. No more lake, Brielle said, pacing. No more stories, no more creepy songs. We pick a direction, and we go through the trees. We don't follow trails. We don't trust what we see. Agreed? Agreed, Desmond said immediately. This place is screwing with us. Ivy clutched a small pendant around her neck. A gift from her grandmother. Something she used to laugh at. A talisman of protection, her grandmother had said. You mock spirits, they mock you back, she'd once warned. Now Ivy wasn't laughing. They packed what they could, left behind what they didn't need, and pushed through the dense foliage. But the forest changed. Branches moved subtly, almost imperceptibly. Tree trunks seemed to shift location the moment they turned their back. What looked like a clear opening would narrow the moment they stepped toward it. It wasn't long before they saw the lake again. Not behind them, in front. A soft splash echoed. Ripples crept toward them. Jaden dropped to his knees, groaning in pain. The marks on his arm had begun to bleed. A dark, viscous ooze leaking from his pores. Mason tried to help, but Jaden recoiled. Don't touch me. I think I'm God. I think it marked me. What do you mean? Callie asked. Jaden looked up, face pale. It's inside me. I can feel it crawling, like vines under my skin. Shut up, Desmond snapped, panic in his voice. You're not making any sense. Jaden screamed, suddenly falling to the ground, his body convulsing. They backed away, horrified as his skin bulged and shifted. His veins darkened beneath his skin, pulsing like worms. "Jaden," Ivy shrieked. Then he stopped, still, unmoving. Mason approached slowly. "Jaden." The body jolted upright, eyes snapping open, pitch black, like the lake's surface at midnight. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Instead, water poured out, thick, endless. Brielle screamed. Desmond lunged forward with a branch, swinging it like a weapon. Jaden's body collapsed, lifeless again, the water soaking into the soil. "Back to camp, now," Mason yelled. They fled through the trees, guided not by trail but sheer instinct. The sky remained frozen, the air sour with rot and lake stench. When they reached the clearing again, the fire was still burning as if they'd never left. "What the hell is this?" Brielle sobbed. "How do we keep ending up back here?" Mason didn't answer. He stared at the fire, jaw clenched. Callie approached him. "You said the story was just a story, that it wasn't real, but this thing knows us. And I think you know something you're not saying." Mason didn't look up. "It wasn't supposed to be real." "What wasn't?" Callie demanded. "My grandfather used to tell me about the lake, said it was older than the forest. Said people who settled here vanished one by one. That something beneath the water remembers names, remembers bloodline." "What are you saying?" "I think it remembers me." Silence. Brielle and Desmond sat on opposite sides of the fire, shivering. Ivy muttered something in another language, some old prayer. Then the singing started again, closer, a low, wet hum, as if someone were gargling a lullaby. Then footsteps, sloshing, from the path. They all turned. Jaden stood at the tree line, skin pale, dripping, mouth hanging slightly open, a trail of water behind him. He raised a hand. "Help me," he said. Callie took a step forward. "No, you died." Jaden's mouth opened wider, unnaturally wide. Water exploded from it, spraying the ground, the trees, the fire. The fire sputtered, then it went out. Darkness swallowed them. Screams erupted. Something moved in the black, a wet, dragging sound, like limbs soaked in mud. Callie felt something brush her ankle. She ran. They all ran. Branches tore at their skin. Brielle tripped, screamed, but Desmond yanked her up. They didn't stop until they reached a ravine too deep to cross without climbing gear. Trapped behind them, the dragging stopped. Only silence. Then Mason whispered, "We need to burn the camp. Everything. The fire's our only chance." Callie turned to him. "You said the story was just a myth." He looked at her, eyes haunted. "I lied. Ashes don't float." Thunder rumbled low in the distance, muffled by the dense canopy, as if the sky was growling a warning none of them could fully understand. Mason stood at the edge of the ravine, his jaw rigid, eyes locked onto the space where Jaden, or whatever had become of him, last stood. Ivy had dropped to her knees, still muttering prayers in hushed, broken syllables, her eyes wide and unfocused. Desmond had snapped. "This is your fault, man," he shouted, advancing on Mason, fists clenched. You knew something was out there and you dragged us in here anyway." Mason didn't move. "I told the story, yeah, but I didn't summon it." "You don't summon a curse," Ivy murmured. "You awaken it." Callie turned to her. "What do you mean?" "The songs, the fire, the names. We said them, out loud, at the lake." Ivy looked up slowly, face pale. "We did exactly what it wanted. We called to it." "Don't get all witchy on us now," Brielle snapped, pacing. "This isn't some ancient ritual. This is real. Jaden died, and something wore him like a costume. Then it walked out of the forest and put out our fire," Mason added grimly. "It doesn't want us leaving." "Fine," Desmond said. "Then we fight back. We burn the camp to the ground. No more fire for it to put out." Callie nodded. "But we need to move fast. It's getting bolder." They pushed their way back toward camp. The forest seemed angrier this time, branches snatching at their clothes, vines clutching ankles, bark groaning like it was being twisted from the inside. Brielle swore she saw eyes in a hollow tree trunk, blinking. When they broke into the clearing again, they all froze. The camp was gone. In its place stood a perfectly smooth stretch of dark earth, moist and glistening. Their tents, their supplies, even the stones of the fire pit gone. No debris, no ash, just earth. Mason stepped forward, kneeling to touch it. His hand recoiled immediately. "It's warm," he said. "Like skin." Desmond backed away, shaking his head. "Nope, nope, this is not happening." Ivy let out a sharp cry. "Look!" From the center of the clearing, the earth moved, just slightly. Then again, like something breathing. A low groan echoed from below, followed by the faintest ripple of water. Callie turned. The lake, it was closer. Again, now just beyond the trees, almost touching the clearing's edge. "It's swallowing everything," Brielle whispered. "The land, the trail, time." Then we burn the forest," Mason said. Everyone turned to him. "We find dry brush, old trunks. We set fire to the roots. If the camp's gone, the trees are next." Desmond hesitated. "What if we burn ourselves in the process?" Mason's voice was steady. "Then we don't die quietly." They split up carefully, keeping each other in sight as they gathered what they could. Broken branches, snapped twigs, strips of cloth for kindling. Desmond and Brielle stacked the fuel, while Ivy used her lighter and a can of bug spray to get a flame going. Smoke curled up. At first it seemed like nothing happened. Then the trees screamed, a sound unlike anything they had ever heard, like wind ripping through flesh, like bark howling. It echoed through the forest in every direction. The fire surged higher. Beneath their feet, the ground trembled, and then the clearing opened. A sinkhole split down the center of the earth where their camp used to be, revealing a churning black pool below. A thick hand shot up from the depths, skeletal, waterlogged, with torn bits of lakeweed hanging like veins. It grabbed Desmond by the leg. He shouted, kicking, punching, grabbing for branches. Callie rushed in and slammed a burning log onto the hand. It hissed. The thing recoiled, leaving Desmond gasping and trembling, a circular welt steaming on his leg. "Fire hurts it," Mason yelled. Brielle threw in more fuel. Ivy screamed and tossed her grandmother's pendant into the flames. It flared bright silver, and for a moment, the sinkhole froze. The moaning stopped. The forest went silent, but it didn't last. From the trees came new figures, children, waterlogged, hollow-eyed, mouths stitched shut with reeds. They moved stiffly, like broken puppets. One held a severed raccoon, another a rusted toy boat dripping lake water. "They're not real," Ivy whispered. "They're what drowned here. Long ago." "Back," Mason barked, swinging another torch. But the children didn't flinch. They simply pointed to the lake, where someone stood. It was Theo, not bloated, not pale, smiling. "Come on," he called softly. "I found a way out." Callie stepped forward instinctively, then stopped. "Theo?" she asked. His eyes glowed faintly. "The lake showed me everything. You don't have to be afraid." Mason threw a rock. It passed through Theo's body. The illusion vanished, replaced by a tall, gaunt creature cloaked in muck and dripping bones. It let out a hiss that sounded like wind across a grave. "Run!" Mason shouted. They bolted into the woods. Fire roared behind them. Screams of dead things echoed into the branches. But the forest wouldn't let go. Roots tangled their feet. Shadows reached from behind trunks. And somewhere deep beneath them, the lake moved, stretching out its influence, pulling everything back to its center. The group burst into a narrow canyon they hadn't seen before. The air was cooler, still. A stone arch rose from the earth, carved with strange symbols. A dry stream bed passed beneath it. "What is this place?" Brielle whispered. Ivy crouched, tracing one of the carvings. "It's older than anything else we've seen. Maybe even older than the curse." Mason turned, breathing hard. "If it's a gate, maybe we use it to go," Desmond demanded. Mason looked past him, into the trees. "Anywhere but here." A distant splash echoed, and then a new voice whispered. This time it was Ivy's name. The whisper repeated, "Ivy," soft as a breath through reeds. It didn't come from behind or beside her, but from within, like it had bubbled up through her spine and taken root in her throat. She staggered back from the archway, eyes wide and glossy. "Ivy?" Callie asked gently. "You okay?" Ivy's lips parted, but the sound that came out wasn't hers. It was a song, that same broken melody, the one they'd heard by the campfire, the one Theo had hummed before he vanished into the lake. It spilled from her lips, unbidden, each note wrong, like they were never meant for a human mouth. Her eyes rolled white. Blood trickled from her nose. Mason rushed forward, gripping her shoulders. Snap out of it. Ivy, wake up! Desmond pulled a knife from his belt and pressed the blade gently to her palm. I'm sorry, he whispered, and sliced. Ivy screamed. The song stopped. She collapsed into Mason's arms, sobbing. It knew my name. It said it's been waiting. It showed me things, faces under the water, hundreds of them, children, animals, even old settlers. They're all there. They want out. Callie knelt beside her, hand trembling. And what does it want from us? Ivy looked up, tears streaking the blood on her cheeks. It wants us to be the next story. Suddenly, the ground beneath the archway began to quake. A pool of black water erupted from the dry stream bed, bubbling violently as if boiled from below. The arch pulsed, each glyph glowing faint blue, then red, then white-hot. A doorway was opening. Brielle screamed, as hands clawed up from the pool, wet, boneless, slapping at the stones. One dragged a half-skeletal torso behind it, eye sockets still oozing water, a jaw clacking in rhythm with the melody Ivy had just sung. Back, Mason shouted. Back now. Desmond hurled a burning branch from the makeshift torch he'd kept smoldering in his pack. It hit the water, fizzed, but didn't stop the things crawling out. 4, then 6, 10, soaked corpses, all ages, all sizes. Some wore bits of clothing, others had none. One was clearly a child, face split by algae-covered wounds. Another was so bloated it barely fit through the arch. Mason turned to Callie. We can't keep running. If that arch is what brought them here, maybe we can send them back. Or seal it forever, Callie said. Either way, Brielle muttered, lighting a fresh branch. We burn them or die screaming. The battle was chaos. Desmond was the first to land a hit, slamming a creature's skull with the butt of his flashlight. It shattered like porcelain. The body slumped, spasmed, and melted into black water that slithered away on its own. Fire and force, Mason yelled. Nothing else works. Callie screamed, as a corpse lunged at her, fingernails like fish hooks. Mason pulled it off her and drove a lit torch into its chest. The thing convulsed, then exploded in a puff of smoke and stench. Ivy crouched near the arch, whispering frantic words in her grandmother's tongue. Her hands moved fast, drawing symbols in ash, in dirt and blood. Glyphs lit up in answer. The doorways shook. From behind them a different voice howled. Theo's, but it wasn't a cry for help, it was a command. Stop fighting. Let it take you. You belong to the lake now. He stepped into view, no longer human. Tall, elongated, his skin dark and slick, like an eel's, his fingers impossibly long, ending in claws like driftwood. He had no eyes, just smooth, glistening skin. Brielle threw a torch. Theo caught it midair and ate the flames. Mason backed up. New plan. Run. They retreated from the arch, dodging the flailing limbs of the undead as Ivy screamed. It's almost sealed. I need more time. Desmond stayed with her, covering her from behind. We've got you. Just hurry. 2 corpses tackled Brielle. She went down, screaming, and the others couldn't reach her in time. She disappeared beneath the black water. Callie screamed. Brielle. Then the archway exploded with light. A shockwave of pure force knocked every creature backward. The corpses shrieked and caught fire, burning from the inside out. Theo staggered, hissing. Ivy collapsed, spent. The water evaporated from the pool, leaving cracked earth and scorched bones. The monsters were gone, but so was Brielle. Mason limped toward the center, helping Ivy to her feet. You did it. You stopped them. Ivy looked up slowly. No, I just paused it. The door's not closed. It's waiting. Callie was sobbing, staring at the empty space where her friend had disappeared. What if it takes us one by one? What if we can't stop it at all? Desmond stood beside her, face pale. We need to get out. Find help. Find someone who knows more. Suddenly a crack echoed through the woods, like a branch snapping, or something following. From behind the trees, fresh mist began to spill in. Mason turned to the others, face grim. Move, now. They didn't look back. The mist didn't drift. It slithered, coiling around trees, crawling along the forest floor like it was alive. The air turned thick with the scent of wet stone and rotting bark. Every breath tasted like a drowned cellar. The 5 remaining friends ran. Branches whipped their faces. Roots clawed at their boots. Yet the lake's pole stretched beyond its waters, tugging at their bones with a force that didn't care about distance. Mason was the first to stop. "Wait," he panted, holding out a hand. "We're moving in circles." Desmond looked around, chest heaving. "How do you know?" Mason pointed to a shredded tarp caught in the low branches of a pine tree, blue and faded. "That's ours." From the second night, Callie's lips trembled. "We've been running straight." "No," Ivy murmured, stepping forward. "The woods are bending around us just like the lake. Nothing here is what it looks like." Suddenly the trees parted, and the lake was there again, closer than ever. Glass still, too still. Not even a breeze disturbed its surface. No birds chirped, no frogs sang. It was as if the lake was listening. "I'm done," Desmond said, backing away. "We don't fight this. We don't stop this. We die here if we don't find a real exit." Mason stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "I'm not leaving Brielle behind. She's gone, man," Desmond shouted. "She was taken. That thing, it consumes people. Then I'll drag her back myself." Desmond grabbed him. "You step 1 foot into that water, you'll be next." "No." It wasn't Mason who spoke. It was Callie. She pointed across the lake. Silhouetted in the mist was a figure. Brielle. She stood motionless, hair clinging to her soaked dress, face unreadable. Around her feet, the lake barely rippled. Mason took a step forward. "Don't," Ivy warned. But it was too late. He was already sprinting for the shore. The water welcomed him, lapping against his shins, then his knees. The others shouted, but Mason didn't stop. "Brielle," he called. "It's me. Come on. We can get out." She didn't respond. He reached waist deep. Brielle tilted her head and opened her mouth. Water poured out, endless, unnatural, gushing from her throat like a faucet. Her eyes rolled back, her jaw split wider, then wider, until it cracked with a wet snap. Something moved inside her. Mason stumbled back, horrified, but the water grabbed him, twisting like hands around his legs. It yanked. He screamed as he fell forward, vanishing beneath the surface. "No!" Callie screamed, running after him, but Desmond tackled her. "You'll die too." Ivy stared at the spot where Mason vanished, clutching a silver charm in her palm, so tightly it cut into her flesh. "He's not dead." "Not yet." "How do you know?" Callie sobbed. "Because the lake wants us to watch." Splash. From the depths, Mason's head burst free, but he was different. His eyes were black, his skin waxy, his voice not his own. "He found us," Mason whispered in a double voice. "The one beneath." Callie froze. "What are you?" "Mason's still down there," the thing answered. "This is just the mouth he left behind." The possessed body stepped forward, dragging itself through the shallows, water clinging to its chest like second skin. "Run," Ivy hissed, "back to the arch. Maybe I can open it again." Desmond grabbed her arm. "We already burned that path." "There's another," she said. "I saw it when I sealed the first gate, deep in the lake. A tunnel, a way out, but we'll have to go under." "You mean dive?" Desmond blinked. "You want us to go into that water?" "Not want," Ivy said, eyes blazing. "Need. It's the only way to reach the thing that's feeding this. The one the curse came from." Callie wiped her face, glancing at the lake. The corrupted Mason body stood still now, chest heaving, water dripping from his empty eyes. "Then we do it fast," she whispered, "before that thing decides to come back for the rest of us." They made their way around the lake's edge, careful to avoid the shallow. More figures lingered there now, other campers, other victims, some recognizable, some decades gone, all whispering in languages the living didn't understand. Ivy led the way, her pendant glowing faintly with each step. At the far end of the lake, hidden beneath an overhang of rock and moss, they found it, a black tunnel beneath the surface. Callie hesitated. "How long do you think it goes?" Ivy looked into the water. "Long enough to test our lungs and our sanity." Desmond strapped a flashlight to his wrist. "Then let's find out." They dove. The world below the surface was silent. No bubbles, no current, just cold. They swam single file. The tunnel twisted unnaturally, spiraling like a snail shell carved into stone. The walls pulsed with veins of red light. Hands reached from the silt, some human, some not. Twice, Callie felt something brush her back. The third time, it grabbed her ankle. She screamed, but only bubbles escaped. Desmond spun, punching the thing in the face. It let go. Ivy's glow grew stronger, leading them forward. Then they emerged into an air pocket. A vast cavern stretched above and around them, lit by bioluminescent fungus clinging to the rock. In the center of the room stood a shrine made of bone and black driftwood. Atop it sat a mask carved from human teeth. "Is this it?" Desmond gasped, coughing water. "It's the heart," Ivy whispered. "This is where it began." Suddenly, the water behind them surged. The mason thing crawled through the tunnel, gasping, hissing, and behind it more. Brielle, Tio, children, creatures made of mud and hate. The final chorus had arrived. The cavern pulsed with a heartbeat not their own. A thump, like the tolling of a distant bell beneath the lake bed, vibrated through their feet. The bone shrine stood silent and watchful, the mask atop it smiling with jagged teeth, ancient, smug, waiting. Ivy stepped forward. The water surged behind them as Theo, Brielle, and the other husks poured into the cavern. Their footsteps made no sound. Their soaked limbs moved in time with the heartbeat, marionettes with drowned eyes. "Don't move," Ivy whispered. Callie and Desmond froze. The air thickened with the scent of rot and old coins. The shriveled mason thing crept forward, speaking with voices not its own. The lake listens. The lake remembers. It doesn't forget those who come with blood on their breath. Callie's hand found a rusted metal rod buried in the cavern floor. Quietly, she picked it up. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice trembling but firm. The mason thing blinked slowly. "We are not the why, we are the how. He waits below, older than death, deeper than roots, the first to drown, the last to rise." Ivy knelt at the shrine. She opened her palm. Blood flowed, slow and warm, dripping onto the bones. "I've seen you," she whispered. "You were human once. You were a boy. You died in this lake." The room stilled, even the heartbeat paused. Ivy stood tall now, voice louder. "You were betrayed, pulled down by hands that should have saved you. But what you became isn't justice. It's a cage. And you're not alone anymore. You made a god out of your grief. But gods made of pain only feed on more pain." The shrine began to hum. Callie felt it behind her eyes. The water writhed. Theo's corpse groaned, jaws opening as black water spilled onto the stone floor like oil. Then it emerged. From the far wall of the cave, the stone cracked open like an egg. A shape moved behind it too large to understand. A face with no features, only a mouth. It smiled wide enough to swallow a house. The first drowned. He did not speak with words. He pressed into their minds. Flashes. A boy under the ice, crying out for his mother. A group of settlers chanting in the woods, offering blood for rain. Generations of sacrifice, one after another feeding him. The lake, his body. The dead, his voice. The stories, his memory. "I won't feed you," Ivy growled, stepping toward the mask. "You already have," the first drowned hissed in her skull. "Each word you've spoken, each story you've heard, they are offerings. I am memory. I am the thing that waits after the last scream." Suddenly, Callie threw the rod like a spear straight at the mask. It struck. The shrine shuddered. The mask cracked. A shriek, inhuman and infinite, ripped through the cave. The drowned surged forward, hands outstretched. Desmond tackled Ivy to the ground. "Seal it." Ivy grabbed a bone from the shattered altar, whispered the words her grandmother had once taught her. Words meant for closing, not calling. Chabalu, Yeth, Tanmorakai. The glyphs from the first arch burned into the cavern walls. The drowned howled, convulsed. Brielle's body froze mid-lunge, head twitching. Then she smiled, the real Brielle, for just a moment, a flicker behind her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, like a flame snuffed under glass, she was gone. All of them were. The corpses collapsed. The first drowned screamed as the shrine folded in on itself, swallowed by a vortex of water and bone, and memories too loud to endure. Stone rained from the ceiling. Desmond dragged Ivy and Callie toward the mouth of the tunnel. "Move, it's collapsing." They dove into the water as the lake itself rebelled. The tunnel twisted and shook. Hands clawed from the walls, but not to pull them down, to help them forward. The lake was letting them go. When they burst from the surface, the moon was rising. The mist was gone. So was the shrine, the drowned, even the arch. Just a lake. Still, empty. Callie pulled herself ashore and vomited. Desmond lay flat on the ground. Sobbed. They're gone. Mason, Brielle, Ivy stood slowly, water dripping from her sleeves. They're free. The lake no longer owns them. Silence followed. Then footsteps in the woods. A man stepped into the moonlight. Park ranger uniform. Wide eyes. We heard screaming, he said. You kids all right? Ivy blinked at him, then at the lake. For once it didn't whisper back. Have you ever followed a path so many times that the forest starts whispering your name? Some trails were never meant to be walked. Some markers were never meant to be followed. And some journeys, once begun, won't let you leave unless they want you to. This is not just a story, it's a generational curse disguised as a trail. A horror passed down through blood and belief, each generation more haunted than the last. In this tale, 7 lives across 7 timelines will chase a truth twisted in roots, shadows, and screams. Each one followed the same path. Each one thought they could beat it. Each one thought they were alone, until they weren't. Welcome to the nightmare that is the trail markers that lead you in circles, until you're not alone. Before we begin, here's a question for you. Would you keep walking a trail if every step you took made the forest more alive and less human? Let me know in the comments below what you would do if a trail marker you passed yesterday is suddenly bleeding today. Like, subscribe, and share for more spine-chilling episodes. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The storm had just passed, leaving the forest soaked in silence. Not even a cricket dared chirp as Elsie Hawthorne stepped off the gravel road and into the dense underbrush of Blackroot Hollow. Her boots sank into the wet moss like it was breathing. She tightened the leather strap on her satchel and looked back at the fading outline of the horse-drawn carriage. The driver, old Caleb, didn't wait to see her go. He'd already cracked the reins and turned the buggy around. Stay off the trail, he'd muttered before she left. Markers ain't what they seem. Elsie dismissed it as mountain superstition, the kind that grew thick where moonshine and fog were plentiful. She was here for one reason: to find her missing brother Tom. He'd come to Blackroot Hollow 6 months ago, a cartographer for the state, tasked with mapping the lesser-known ridges. His last letter was strange. He spoke of trails that rearranged themselves and voices humming through trees. Then nothing. Now here she was, chasing a whisper with a lantern and a pistol. The first trail marker came fast, too fast. A slab of rotted cedar hung from a crooked nail on a tree. Carved into it, barely legible beneath the moss, was a spiral. Not a circle, not a swirl, something more angular, like a snail's shell designed by someone who never saw one before. Elsie touched it. The bark beneath it was warm. She shook her head and kept walking. The forest didn't like paths. The undergrowth was thick with vine and bramble. Branches curled downward like they were trying to brush her hair. After 30 minutes of struggling uphill, the second marker appeared. Same spiral, different tree, different direction. She stopped. The trail had curved, but not back, not forward. It felt like it moved sideways. Her compass spun uselessly in her palm. She scowled, stowed it, and pressed on. The woods deepened. Trees grew so close together they shared bark. Shadows danced without wind. Her lantern flickered once, then surged bright. That's when she saw it. A third trail marker. Same spiral, blood smeared across it. Fresh. Something watched her. She spun around, pistol raised, but the forest was still. Not silent. Still, like it was holding its breath. She backed against a tree, heart pounding. Then she heard it. Elsie. Not loud, not a scream, a whisper that tickled the back of her neck. She spun again. Nothing. She ran. Branches tore at her coat. Brambles clawed at her legs. She sprinted until her lungs burned. Only when she reached a clearing did she stop. The forest parted like it was afraid of what lay ahead. There in the middle of the clearing was a cabin, half collapsed, overgrown with ivy. Smoke curled from its chimney. Smoke? She didn't wait. She approached carefully, lantern raised. The door hung half open, hinges rusted but not broken. She stepped inside. The air was warm, and someone had just left. Tea steamed on the table. A chair rocked gently back and forth. On the wall hung 7 spiral-marked trail markers, each carved into different wood: pine, oak, maple, elm. One of them had a face sketched beneath the spiral. "Tom? Tom?" she called. Something creaked above her. She looked up. Nothing but the rafters and a trapdoor to the attic. Her gut twisted. She climbed. Each step groaned, begging her to turn back. At the top she paused, hand on the trapdoor. It opened on its own. Cold flooded over her like water, and the smell: rot, mildew, and iron. She raised the lantern. No attic, just space. Empty, black, endless space. And eyes. Dozens. No, hundreds. Some wide as fists. Others no bigger than moths. They blinked in unison. One of them moved. A long, thin hand with 6 fingers slid from the void and reached for her face. She screamed, stumbled back, and the trapdoor slammed shut, nearly catching her coat. She fell down the stairs, her lantern shattered. Darkness rushed in like a tide. Then, the humming began. Low, deep, like monks chanting from underground. She crawled toward the door, hands bleeding from broken glass. When she burst outside, the clearing was gone. The cabin was gone. She stood in the forest again. A spiral marker stared at her from a tree she swore she'd passed hours ago. Same spiral, but this one wasn't carved. It was growing, like fungus. She touched it. Her fingers tingled. Then footsteps. Not hers. She whirled around. Nothing, but the trail behind her had changed. No longer overgrown. It was cleared, leading deeper, and someone was standing at the edge, dressed in her brother's coat, his back to her. "Tom," she cried. He didn't turn, just walked. She chased him. They ran in silence, him ahead, her behind. The trail twisted and warped beneath her feet. Trees moved aside like curtains. Moss curled upward like tongues. Finally he stopped, at the center of a stone circle. 7 stones, each carved with spirals. One stone bled. Tom turned. It wasn't him. The face was hollow. Eyes 2 black voids. Mouth stitched shut, with hair. Yet it smiled. The forest shuddered. Elsie screamed. The wind was colder now. Heavier, like it carried the whispers of 1,000 forgotten souls. Alexander Stone didn't know why he'd come back to Blackroot Hollow, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow inevitable. He'd heard the stories. Of course, everyone had. The trail markers, the missing people, the things that followed those foolish enough to walk the cursed path. But stories were just stories. Warnings whispered by old men around crackling fires. He was a man of reason, a man of science, a man who didn't believe in ghosts or curses or anything that couldn't be explained. He'd been told about Elsie Hawthorne, the last person to disappear in these woods over 30 years ago now. But no one knew exactly what happened to her. Some said she'd gone mad. Some said she'd been taken. But to Alexander it was all just superstition, a collective hysteria that ran wild in these parts. That's why when he'd returned to investigate the strange disappearances in Blackroot Hollow, he wasn't afraid. At least he didn't think he was. Sure, the forest had a dense, unsettling atmosphere to it, but he'd been through worse. He had to be here to debunk the myths, to set the record straight. His boots crunched against the wet leaves as he walked down the forest path, the trees looming like silent sentinel. A trail marker appeared almost immediately. A simple wooden post, with the same spiral carved into its surface. It looked old, weathered, like it had been standing there for generations, patiently waiting. He didn't stop. Just a carving, he told himself. Nothing to be concerned about. But then the second marker came into view, and the third, and the fourth. He halted, a cold shiver crawling down his spine. The spirals, they weren't just carved into the wood. They seemed to be growing on the surface, pulsing. He reached out to touch one, his fingers brushing the grooves, and the moment his skin made contact, the wind howled and something shifted in the air. He jerked his hand back, but it was too late. The path behind him had changed. The trees had moved. The ground had reshaped itself. Alex stared ahead, his heart hammering. The forest had changed. What was happening? He wasn't imagining it. The trees now bent in strange directions, their trunks twisted like malformed limbs. The air was thick with an unnatural, suffocating stillness. The spirals, They were everywhere now, in every direction, above him, beneath him. The world was closing in. He wasn't alone. A sound, a low rustle in the underbrush, caught his attention. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. Nothing. The sound came again, closer this time, like the crunching of dry leaves underfoot. He felt the hairs on his neck stand up. Something was watching him. No, just the wind. Just the wind. He thought, though it was hard to convince himself. His pulse quickened as he scanned the trees. And then he saw it. A figure. Tall, thin, almost skeletal, standing at the edge of the clearing. Its back was to him, but its head was turned almost completely around, as if it could see him without moving. Its face was hollow. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth blank skin. The wind died. The figure did not move. Alex's heart slammed in his chest, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. The figure's body remained unnaturally still, but its head moved toward him, jerking unnaturally like a puppet on invisible strings. With a deep guttural groan, the thing took a step forward. Alex's body froze. This isn't real. This can't be real. He blinked. The figure was closer, much closer. It was now standing directly in front of him. The stench of decay filled the air, thick and suffocating. Alex raised his revolver. His hand trembled. Just shoot it, you fool. But he couldn't move. His legs were like stone, his feet rooted to the ground. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was not a sound but a feeling, a gnawing sensation in his skull, like something was eating away at his thoughts. You shouldn't be here. The words weren't clear, not entirely, but they echoed through his mind, reverberating like a curse. Alex staggered backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't look away. It was as though the figure wasn't real, but somehow it was all too real. A whisper, another voice, inside his head. You've seen it now. You can't leave. A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the trees. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the twisted, gnarled forest around him. The spirals on the trees seemed to glow brighter, pulsing like living things. And the figure stepped toward him. The ground beneath him began to tremble, as though something was rising from the earth. He stumbled back, his mind racing. What the hell was happening? His feet slipped, and he fell to the muddy ground. The figure didn't move. Instead, the earth cracked open around him, wide fissures appearing in the soil. A cold, slimy hand shot out from the depths. Alex screamed. The figure reached down, its fingers long and gnarled, grasping his ankle with a strength that felt like iron. The world spun. The ground tilted. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. And then, just before the darkness consumed him, he heard a voice, his own voice, whispering through the forest. They are always watching. The first thing Emma Pierce noticed when she stepped off the bus at Blackroot Hollow was the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you get in a sleepy town at dusk. No, this was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, thick and suffocating, like the world had held its breath just for her arrival. Emma wasn't supposed to be here. At least, not like this. She had come to visit her aunt, who had fallen ill, but Aunt Marjorie was gone now, and so, Emma had been left with the house, an old, creaking thing on the edge of the hollow. No one else in the family wanted it. They'd all said it was cursed, too far gone to save. The house was an heirloom, though, passed down from generations of Pierce women, and Emma had inherited it. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the faint glimmer of hope that she could uncover the mystery of her family's history, or perhaps it was the pull of something she couldn't name. But after the bus pulled away, and the clouds hung thick and gray above her, she was standing on the threshold of Blackroot Hollow, and she could feel something watching. The wind blew through the trees like it had a voice. It whispered and moaned, but not in the way the wind usually did. This wind felt older, ancient perhaps. Emma glanced at the dense forest ahead. It was almost unnatural, the way the trees stood, thick and close, blocking out all sunlight. The air felt like it was vibrating, like a hum that she could feel in her bones. It wasn't until she reached the edge of the forest that she saw it. A trail marker. It stood just inside the woods, carved into a boulder, the spiral so distinct that it looked as though it had been etched by something alive. The spiral was surrounded by what looked like ancient twisted roots, which seemed to crawl toward her almost as if they were reaching for her feet. She'd read about the trail markers, of course. Every town had its folklore, but those stories were old. Nothing but dusty tales told by locals who had too much time on their hands. Right? Emma knew better than to believe in ghost stories, especially after losing her aunt. Marjorie's death had been sudden and unexpected. There was no mystery to it. She just passed. But as Emma walked deeper into the hollow, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The stories, they weren't just stories, they were warnings. Despite the warnings, Emma found herself drawn to the trail marker. She stepped closer, curious, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. The moment she touched it, the forest seemed to shudder, the ground beneath her feet rippling as though the earth itself was waking up. Her heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let fear take root. She had come here to uncover the truth, and if that meant facing the unknown, so be it. The forest felt even darker now, the path before her leading deeper into the trees. There was no sound, no birds, no wind, not even the distant call of an animal, only the feeling of watching. But something had changed. The path had split. Two trails lay ahead, one curving to the right, the other leading straight through the thickest part of the woods. Emma hesitated. She could almost hear her aunt's voice in her head, telling her to turn back, but her curiosity was too strong. She stepped toward the trail that went straight ahead, drawn forward by an invisible pull, a sense of urgency she couldn't quite place. It didn't take long before the forest seemed to close in on her. The trees weren't just close anymore. They were leaning toward her, their branches twisting and creaking like they were alive. The air had grown thick with a cold, wet fog that clung to her skin. Every few steps, Emma would glance around, but there was no sign of life. It was like the woods had become a tomb, silent, oppressive, and far too still. And then she saw it. A second trail marker, standing high on a tree. A twisted piece of wood with the same spiral pattern carved into it. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure why, but the marker sent a jolt of recognition through her, like a memory she couldn't quite recall. It was then that she heard it, the soft scrape of footsteps behind her. Emma froze, her heart hammering. She wasn't alone. She spun around quickly, her hand reaching for the knife at her belt. Nothing, but the air around her had changed. The dense fog swirled, thickening as if it were alive, creeping toward her, folding over itself like a living entity. The sound of breathing filled her ears, heavy, labored, but it wasn't hers. It was coming from the trees. The fog parted briefly, revealing a figure standing just inside the shadows of the woods. Its shape was thin, almost skeletal, its face hidden beneath a cloak of darkness. The figure moved closer, so silently that it might have been a shadow itself. "Who's there?" Emma called, her voice shaky. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised one hand, pointing directly at her, its long, gnarled fingers almost too long. The forest seemed to sigh in response, the trees shifting and creaking. Emma's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt frozen. The figure took another step forward. The hum, that low, buzzing sound, returned, filling the air. It was louder now, vibrating in her chest. And then, in a voice that was more a whisper in her mind than a sound, it spoke. "You've been chosen." Emma gasped. She wasn't sure why, but the words made her head spin. She took a shaky step backward, her fingers clutching at the knife in her hand. You can't have me." The words came out of her mouth before she could stop them, desperation bleeding into her voice. The figure didn't respond. Instead, its shadow seemed to lengthen, stretching across the ground, until it engulfed her. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the figure was gone. The forest was silent. Emma stood frozen, barely breathing, her pulse thundering in her ears. She glanced back over her shoulder. The trail behind her was gone. The trees were different now, twisted into strange shapes, forming an impenetrable wall. There was no path. There was no way out, and the spiral trail markers were everywhere. Oliver Gray had never been one to believe in the supernatural. It wasn't that he was skeptical of the unknown. He simply found it easier to put his faith in facts, in science, in the things that could be seen, touched, and measured. So when he had heard about Blackroot Hollow, the strange disappearances and the local legends surrounding the spirals on the trees, he had scoffed. People would believe anything, especially in the face of something they didn't understand. But Oliver wasn't here for the stories. He was here to photograph the woods. As an amateur photographer and self-proclaimed adventurer, he had heard that Blackroot Hollow was one of the most picturesque places in Virginia, filled with ancient trees, moss-covered rocks, and hidden streams. He'd planned on capturing it all, from the rolling fog that clung to the ground at dawn, to the deep green canopy that swallowed the sun at midday. What better way to showcase the raw beauty of the wilderness than through the lens of his camera? The moment he stepped onto the worn, narrow path, however, he felt that something had shifted. The air was thick with an oppressive weight. The forest stretched out ahead of him, every tree casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward him. The wind had a strange quality to it, almost like it was whispering something in a language he couldn't understand. He didn't like it, but Oliver was determined. He had to get the perfect shot. His boots crunched softly beneath him as he ventured further into the woods, taking photos here and there of the sunlight filtering through the trees, the sparkling dew on the leaves. He almost forgot about the unease that had crept up on him, until he noticed something odd, a trail marker. It wasn't particularly special at first glance, just a simple wooden post nailed to a tree with the same spiral pattern carved into it that he'd heard about from the locals. But there was something about it, something unsettling. The way the carving seemed almost too deliberate, too exact. Oliver approached it, his camera hanging from his neck. As he inspected the spiral closely, he noticed something that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The carving wasn't just old. It moved. His eyes widened as the spiral twisted in front of him, shifting in a slow, deliberate circle, like the hand of a clock caught in time. It was subtle, but there was no mistaking it. This wasn't normal. His breath caught in his throat. He took a step back, stumbling but never taking his eyes off the marker. He reached for his camera and snapped a photo, as though the act of doing so might somehow protect him from the growing dread that gripped him. The moment the shutter clicked, the wind howled through the tree. A shadow darted past the corner of his eye. He whipped his head to the side. There was nothing there. No, there was something. A figure crouched low in the underbrush, moving quickly, too quickly. "Hello?" Oliver called out, his voice unsteady. No answer. The figure was gone. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. Maybe it was just an animal. But then why did it feel like he was the one being watched? A second marker appeared ahead of him, then a third, each one more vivid than the last, and with each one the forest seemed to become more twisted. The trees leaning in closer, their gnarled branches stretching like fingers to clutch at his skin. Oliver's mind raced. This isn't right. He turned to leave, but the moment he turned around, the path was gone. The trees had closed in on him, forming a thick wall of branches that he could not see past. Panic gripped him as he searched for the way back. The trail had shifted. He wasn't alone anymore. A soft rustling came from behind him. This time he didn't hesitate. He spun around, camera raised, ready to snap a photo. But there was no figure, nothing. Only the trees stretching ever higher, blocking out the sky. Then came the hum. It was low at first, like the distant echo of a violin string vibrating in the air. But it grew louder and closer. It was like the forest itself was singing, but the tune was distorted, unnatural, twisted. The trees shuddered. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath his feet. Oliver stumbled backward, the hum growing louder, closer. His eyes darted around, but the trees, now a twisted blur of shapes, seemed to blur together. His breath quickened. He tried to speak, but no sound escaped. It was like the forest was swallowing him whole. Then he saw a figure standing just beyond the trees, its face obscured by a cloak of shadow. It was taller than a man, much taller, and its arms were long and stretched unnaturally, hanging by its sides like something unnatural, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The figure raised its hand, pointing straight at him. The hum grew deafening, and Oliver knew He knew without a doubt that the figure wasn't just some lost soul wandering the woods. It was something much older, much darker, something that belonged to the forest. His body froze. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure took a step forward, its feet gliding just above the ground. It was coming for him, and then the world shattered. The ground beneath his feet opened wide, a deep, jagged crack splitting the earth in two. Oliver fell, his screams lost in the deafening roar of the forest's song. The trees closed in around him like a cage, and the hum reached its crescendo. He was falling, no, sinking into the earth, into the darkness, into something far beyond his comprehension. Before everything went black, a single thought pierced his mind. I should have left. I should have never come here. Rachel Davis had heard the stories all her life. The dark tales about Blackroot Hollow, the unsettling murmurs of people who'd gone into the woods and never come back. The old-timers in her hometown, with their crooked smiles and eyes that flickered nervously when the subject came up, spoke in hushed tones about the spiral markers. They warned her to stay away, to keep clear of the forest. But Rachel had never been one to heed superstitions. She was a reporter, a truth seeker. There had to be a logical explanation for everything, everything. Her journalistic instincts told her that if she could just get to the bottom of it, debunk the myths, she could expose the truth behind the disappearances and put an end to the town's paranoid fears. But as Rachel parked her car at the edge of Blackroot Hollow and stepped out into the cool autumn air, something inside her guts stirred uneasily. She'd spent her childhood hearing these stories, and now, as an adult, she was here to investigate. The forest loomed before her, a mass of dark, ancient trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The hollow was quiet, eerily so, and the wind carried the faintest smell of decay, like something long dead, forgotten. Her instincts told her to be cautious, to turn back, but she wasn't one to run from a challenge. She checked her camera, making sure it was ready, and stepped onto the dirt path that led into the forest. The moment she set foot on the trail, the temperature seemed to drop. The air grew thick with the scent of wet earth, pine, and something else. Something wrong. Rachel shivered, but she ignored it, adjusting the strap of her bag as she moved deeper into the wood. The path twisted and turned, the trees looming higher and higher as if the forest was slowly swallowing her whole. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She was here to gather information, to capture proof of the strange happenings in Blackroot Hollow. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she glanced to the side, her eyes would catch a glimpse of something, just a shadow, flitting between the trees, something moving. She told herself it was just the wind, playing tricks with the light. But the chill in the air kept growing, and the shadows, they were getting closer. And then she saw it, the first marker. It stood beside an old oak tree, its surface worn and weathered by time. But what caught Rachel's attention was the carving, the spiral. It was perfect, its lines sharp and deliberate, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't belong in a place like this. Not in the middle of the woods. She approached it cautiously, her fingers brushing the rough surface of the wood. As soon as she touched it, something happened. A ripple ran through the air, a sudden shift in the atmosphere, as though the very space around her had bent. The trees groaned, the ground beneath her feet trembled, the air seemed to grow denser, and Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. What is this? She stepped back, her eyes darting around. The shadows seemed to stretch out, growing longer, darker, and the sounds of the forest seemed to fade into an eerie silence. She felt her breath catch in her throat. There was something else here, something alive, watching her. A noise to her left, a sharp crack of a twig breaking underfoot. Rachel spun around, but there was nothing. Only trees, shadows. Stop it, Rachel. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She turned back to the path, but it wasn't the same path anymore. The markers, they were everywhere. The spiral symbols, carved into trees, rocks, and even the earth itself. They weren't there before. They hadn't been. The forest around her was changing. Panic crawled up her spine. The trees no longer felt like trees. They felt like walls. The path had disappeared entirely, replaced by an oppressive, dense maze of woods that seemed to lead nowhere. She couldn't even tell if she was walking in circles. Then the humming started, low at first, barely perceptible, but it grew louder. Rachel stopped dead in her track. The sound was all around her now, vibrating in her chest, in her teeth. It was like 1,000 voices murmuring, chanting in an ancient tongue, their words just out of reach. And then it appeared, a figure moving between the trees, gliding effortlessly across the ground. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its skin was pale, nearly translucent, and it wore a cloak made of shadow that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Rachel could feel its gaze, like burning coals digging into her skin. Her heart raced, panic surging as her body screamed at her to run. She couldn't breathe. Her limbs felt heavy, as though the forest itself was pulling her deeper into its clutches. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating. Rachel finally found her voice, hoarse and trembling. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. It just raised its hand, long fingers extending, pointing directly at her. "No, no, no." Rachel stumbled backward, her legs shaking beneath her, but the figure didn't move closer. It just stood there, pointing, its arm unmoving. The humming grew louder. The spirals on the trees began to glow, their lines shifting, twisting as though they were alive. Rachel couldn't take it anymore. She turned and ran. Branches whipped at her face. The underbrush tangled at her feet. She barely noticed, too terrified to care about anything, except escaping whatever nightmare she had stumbled into. Her breath was ragged, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had to get out of the forest. She had to crash. Rachel hit the ground hard, falling face first into the mud. She gasped for breath, trying to push herself up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She could feel it, the thing that had been watching her. And then, from somewhere behind her came the voice. "You cannot escape." The voice was soft, cold, almost mechanical, like it was coming from a place far, far away, but it reverberated through her mind. Rachel turned slowly, knowing, but not wanting to believe what she was about to see. The figure was standing behind her, its face now visible beneath the hood, but there were no eyes, no mouth, just empty sockets, where something should have been. And then a sound, a low, wet, gurgling noise, as the figure leaned forward. Rachel couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The darkness closed in around her, the forest shifting and twisting like it was alive, trapping her. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat as the world went black. Lucy Carter wasn't the kind of person who believed in fate. She was a pragmatic woman, a woman of the world. She had worked hard to get where she was. A detective in the city with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of justice. But when her partner, Gregory Mills, had disappeared on a routine case, disappeared without a trace, Lucy couldn't help but feel that something was wrong, something unnatural at play. Her search for Gregory had led her to Blackroot Hollow. At first it seemed like an odd lead, a dead end buried deep in the mountains, surrounded by trees and whispers. But after weeks of searching, Lucy had found something strange in the local records. A connection between Gregory's disappearance and the history of Blackroot Hollow, a place notorious for strange vanishings and unsettling stories. They had all gone the same way, the strange symbols, the eerie spirals carved into trees, the unnerving whispers in the wind, and all of them had been last seen in this hollow. Lucy had to find answers. She arrived at dusk, the low orange sun casting long shadows across the path that led into the heart of the woods. The air was still and thick, the trees looming overhead like silent, watchful giants. Her boots crunched over the dry leaves as she stepped into the forest, the weight of her task hanging heavy on her shoulders. She had never been the type to back down from a challenge. Her every step was measured, her eyes sharp. She was ready for whatever the hollow had to offer. But as she ventured deeper, the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. The wind had stopped. The sounds of the world seemed to fade away, replaced by a low hum in the distance, a soft, unsettling vibration that resonated deep in her chest. It wasn't natural. It wasn't right. Lucy paused. She reached into her bag, pulling out her flashlight. As she clicked it on, The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted shapes of the trees. The path seemed to stretch ahead endlessly, but something about it didn't sit right with her. It was almost like the forest had a way of leading you, of pulling you deeper into its grasp. She continued walking, her eyes scanning the woods for any sign of Gregory. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the thick underbrush. And then she saw a trail marker standing tall against the backdrop of gnarled trees, the spiral carved into its surface glowing faintly in the dim light. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. She had seen pictures of these symbols in the case files, had heard about them from the local, but seeing one in person standing alone in the middle of the hollow was different. It felt wrong. It felt like the forest itself was watching her, judging her, as if it was waiting for her to make a mistake. She took a step toward it, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But her need for answers was greater. She had to know. She had to understand what happened to Gregory. When her hand brushed against the marker, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. It was a subtle shift at first, but then the earth shook harder. Lucy stumbled back, her pulse racing. The air had thickened, pressing in on her like a heavy blanket. The hum grew louder, and then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it, a shadow darting between the trees. Her heart pounded in her chest. There was something there. "Who's there?" Lucy called, her voice steady but filled with tension. She reached for the gun at her side, fingers trembling, but she didn't pull it out. Not yet. She wasn't sure what she was facing, but it wasn't a person. She could feel it in her bones. The shadow moved again, faster this time. It darted between the trees, just beyond the beam of her flashlight. Lucy's hand tightened around her flashlight, and she took a deep breath, pushing forward. The hollow had claimed enough lives, Gregory's and so many before him. She wasn't going to let it claim hers too. As she advanced, the shadows around her grew darker, thicker, until it felt like the entire forest was closing in. Every step she took was met with the same oppressive silence, the same low hum that seemed to reverberate inside her skull. And then she found it, another marker. But this one was different. It wasn't just a simple spiral. The carving on this one was alive. The grooves in the wood seemed to pulse, shifting and moving as if they were being formed in real time, like something was writing the symbol into the wood. The hum grew louder, vibrating the very air around her. Before Lucy could react, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, sending a wave of dirt and roots spilling upward like some ancient creature waking from a long slumber. She fell to her knees as the earth split further apart, the air thick with the stench of decay and something far older than the forest itself. From the chasm in the earth, something rose, a figure tall and twisted, clothed in a cloak of shadow. Its limbs were too long, stretching unnaturally like a grotesque puppet. It was silent at first, but Lucy could hear it in her head. The whisper, the low, familiar hum of something far older than time itself. The same sound that had haunted the hollow for generations. The figure took a slow step toward her, and the hum became a growl, a deep rumble that seemed to reverberate from within the earth itself. And then the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have come. You've disturbed the sleep." Lucy froze, her breath caught in her throat. The voice was not human. Nothing about the figure was human. Its form was like a twisted amalgamation of shadow, vine, and bark. Its eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to look right through her. "You will stay, like the other." The words echoed in her mind, as if they were not spoken aloud, but implanted deep into her thoughts. The figure's fingers twitched, and from the earth below, tendrils of root and vine shot upward, twisting around Lucy's legs, holding her fast. Panic surged within her. She yanked at the roots, trying to free herself, but it was no use. The more she struggled, the more the vines tightened, pulling her deeper into the chasm that had opened beneath her feet. Her flashlight flickered one last time before the darkness swallowed everything. Elias Winters had been a skeptic for as long as he could remember. A journalist by trade, he thrived on facts and figures, on cold, hard evidence. But when his sister Rachel had gone missing in Blackroot Hollow, a place known for its strange reputation, he couldn't simply sit idly by. The police had found nothing. His parents had nearly given up hope. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His sister wasn't the type to wander off, to leave without a trace. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to find logic where there was none. What had happened to her? It was the only question that gnawed at him as he packed his things and drove to the small town of Blackroot Hollow. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but he couldn't just ignore the rumors anymore. Something had happened here, something that went beyond mere coincidence. He arrived under a gray sky, the clouds hanging low and heavy over the town like a shroud. The locals were tight-lipped, almost too tight-lipped, their eyes darting away when Elias asked about Rachel, or the strange occurrences in the woods. They all knew the story, the disappearances, the whispers of unnatural forces lurking in the hollow. But no one wanted to talk about it. They just wanted to forget. As Elias stepped into the forest, a cold wind swept through the trees, sending a chill through his spine. The path before him twisted and turned, and though the sun was setting, there was no light, no warmth, only darkness pressed in on all sides. The trees, old and towering, seemed to loom over him, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal hands. It didn't take long for him to find the first marker. It stood tall, a spiraled symbol carved into the bark of an ancient oak tree. Elias stopped, his heart skipping a beat. He had heard about these markings, supposedly warnings from those who had come before, left behind to mark the way. The more he looked at it, the more uneasy he became. It was as if the spiral were shifting, the lines curling and twisting in unnatural patterns. But Elias wasn't one to back down. He had come here to find answers, and answers were what he was going to get. He moved past the marker, his eyes scanning the path ahead, the underbrush crackling beneath his boots. The forest felt alive, almost as though it were watching him, waiting for him to make a wrong turn, to stumble into its depths. As he walked, the air grew thicker, the silence more oppressive. The further he ventured, the more the light seemed to fade, swallowed up by the trees. He felt an odd sensation, like something or someone was following him. But when he turned around, there was nothing. A low hum filled the air. It was faint at first, a distant vibration, but it grew louder, reverberating in his chest. Elias gritted his teeth, trying to focus, to push through the strange sensation. But the hum was growing, echoing from all around him, until it was a constant presence, droning in the back of his mind. Then he saw it, another marker. This one was different. The spiral was darker, more intense, and its edges seemed to move, swirling in a way that felt wrong, unnatural. Elias could see it clearly now. The air around the marker shimmered, distorting the forest around it. He took a step closer, drawn in by some unseen force. What is this? Before he could touch it, something shifted in the trees behind him. A rustling, followed by a low, guttural growl. His blood ran cold. Elias spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. Through the trees he saw a figure, a tall, shadowy form, lurking just out of the corner of his vision. "Who's there?" Elias demanded, his voice firm, but the words caught in his throat as he stared into the darkness. There was no answer, only a sickening silence. The figure didn't move. It simply watched. He raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam through the trees. But it was as though the light didn't touch the shadows. The forest had absorbed it, swallowing it whole. The figure was gone, but Elias could still feel it. The hum grew loud. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, something vibrating through the earth itself. His feet were rooted to the ground, the sensation almost suffocating. The trees around him seemed to bend inward, their trunks twisting, their branches reaching out toward him. He was surrounded, trapped in a living nightmare. His hands clenched at his sides, but he couldn't move. It was like the forest had taken hold of him, held him fast with invisible chains. Panic surged within him, his breath quickened, his pulse raced. "I have to get out of here." But the path, the forest, the very air itself, seemed to conspire against him. Then, just as suddenly as the feeling had overtaken him, it stopped. The hum faded, the trees straightened, the oppressive weight lifted. Elias exhaled shakily, his heart still hammering in his chest. He turned back to the marker, unsure of what to do next. But before he could take another step, the ground beneath him cracked. The earth split wide open, sending a violent tremor through the ground. A scream tore from his throat as he stumbled backward, his legs buckling beneath him. The forest floor cracked, sending Elias sprawling into the dirt, his flashlight slipping from his grasp. He scrambled to push himself up, but the roots of the trees shot up from the earth, coiling around his legs, pulling him deeper into the ground. His eyes darted around in panic. His body was held fast, unable to move. The more he struggled, the tighter the roots gripped him. He could feel the earth pulling him down, pulling him into something far darker, far older. And then in the distance, he saw it, the figure. It was closer now. Its shadow stretched out before it, like a dark cloud, its limbs long and twisted, hanging from its body, like rotten vines. Its face, if it could even be called a face, was a hollow mask of shadow, eyes empty, mouth a black gash that whispered words Elias couldn't hear. The figure didn't move closer. It stood there, watching him, and then the voice came, low, resonant, a whisper in his mind. You will stay, like the others. Elias couldn't answer. He couldn't scream. The roots were closing in around him, and the darkness was swallowing everything. He could feel it, the pull, the draw of the earth, the hollow's call. It was taking him to where his sister had gone, taking him to where the others had vanished, and there was no way out. Lucy Waters was the granddaughter of Elias Winters, but she never knew him. He had disappeared when her father was just a boy, and the story of his vanishing was one that had haunted her family for generations. It had become part of her family's lore, the tragic disappearance of Elias and the mysterious case of Rachel Davis, her aunt, who had vanished under the same strange circumstances in Blackroot Hollow years before. Lucy had grown up hearing stories, but like her father before her, she had always brushed them off as fanciful tales, nothing more than the exaggerated gossip of a small, frightened town. But when Lucy's father passed away unexpectedly, she was left with more questions than answers. What happened to Elias? What happened to Rachel? The old journals that her father kept filled with his attempts to uncover the truth about her grandfather's disappearance left her with more confusion than clarity. Determined to find answers, Lucy decided to visit Blackroot Hollow herself, the place where it all began. She was no stranger to grief, but the idea of walking into the forest where her family had been lost felt like walking into the heart of a nightmare. As she made her way to the outskirts of the hollow, she couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The unanswered questions, the shadows of the past. Her car screeched to a halt at the edge of the forest. The woods before her were thick and ominous, and the wind whispered through the trees, a sound she had heard her entire life, but never truly understood. Lucy grabbed her flashlight and a few other tools, determination set on her face. She was prepared. She had to be. As she stepped into the woods, she felt a coldness settle in her bones, deeper than the autumn air could account for. The leaves crunched beneath her boots, and each step felt heavier than the last. The trees seemed to stretch higher, looming over her, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. Her flashlight flickered, and she shook it, frustrated. The hum, that strange, distant hum, seemed to echo through the woods, vibrating the very air. It was there again, just like the stories had described, a constant, low thrum that made her skin crawl. And then, as if in answer, she saw it. The first marker. Her heart skipped a beat. The spiral was familiar, and yet it was different. Darker. Its surface seemed to ripple, the wood pulsing with an eerie life of its own. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. She had been prepared to find the markers, to search for answers, but the sight of one in person was something else entirely. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong to this world. She reached out, her fingers brushing the bark. A shock of cold surged up her arm, and a vision flashed before her eyes. A figure tall and shadowed, its face hidden beneath a cloak of darkness, loomed before her, its hollow eyes gazing into her very soul. It whispered her name, her father's name, her grandfather's name. You are too late. The voice wasn't spoken aloud. It was felt deep inside her skull, like a dark echo reverberating in her mind. She pulled her hand back in shock, stumbling backward, but her feet caught on the roots of a nearby tree, sending her crashing to the ground. Her heart raced in her chest. For a moment, the world around her felt like it was spinning. The wind howled in her ears, The trees creaked ominously, and the hum intensified, as if it were growing louder, feeding off her fear. Lucy's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself up, her hands trembling. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. The forest was closing in on her, the shadows thickening, suffocating her. She didn't have time to process what had just happened before the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air shifted, pulling her toward the earth. Her body went rigid as she felt someone moving beneath her, brushing against her skin, pushing against her ribs. The trees around her seemed to bend toward her, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes, their roots reaching for her ankles, pulling at her legs, trying to drag her into the soil. The hum became deafening, vibrating her bones, shaking the very air around her. No, she thought, her pulse pounding in her throat. I won't go. Not like them, not like Elias, not like Rachel. She fought, trying to pull herself free, but the roots were too strong. She struggled, her fingers scraping against the rough bark of the trees, as the ground continued to quake beneath her. Panic set in, her mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if she didn't escape. The hum became a cacophony, filling her mind, drowning out all other thoughts. And then, just as she thought she would be pulled into the earth forever, she saw something, a shadow, a shape, moving through the trees. It wasn't the same figure she had seen in the vision. It was someone else, someone human. Lucy. The voice was clear, sharp, cutting through the buzzing chaos of the forest. She turned her head, but the figure was already too close. A man tall and strong, his face grim with determination. He reached out, pulling her hand from the roots, lifting her up as the ground seemed to split open beneath them. Come on, he shouted. Lucy's legs gave way as he pulled her free, but she managed to scramble to her feet with his help. She was out of the grasp of the forest, but she wasn't sure for how long. The man's eyes were wide with terror. His face was familiar in the way that it shouldn't be. The name didn't come to her immediately, but as she met his eyes, the truth struck her like a cold punch to the stomach. It was Elias Winters, her grandfather. You're, her voice cracked, the words almost choking her. He wasn't dead. He wasn't gone. How? Elias didn't answer. His grip tightened on her arm as he dragged her away from the markers, away from the spirals that seemed to draw them both in. But as they moved, the hum began to fade. The roots stopped pulling. The shadows retreated. The forest released. Elias stopped just at the edge of the forest, his eyes scanning the trees one last time, as if waiting for something. Then he turned to her. His expression was grim. It's not over, Lucy. They never leave. They never let go. And as the wind picked up again, Lucy's blood ran cold.